We're ready.
Please stop the share, Melanie, and begin.
We're ready.
Hello, my name is Carolyn Williams, and I'm the Social Action Chair for the Houston Metropolitan Alumnae Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Before we begin tonight, we'd like to take a moment of silence to honor the life, legacy, and service of our Supreme Court Justice, Ms. Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I'm excited to serve as tonight's moderator of a very important discussion, which just happens to occur on National Black Voter Day. Did you know that Texas is one of very few states where ex-offenders are eligible to register to vote immediately upon completion of their sentence or period of incarceration? Did you know that in 2020, there are approximately 30,000 ex-offenders that will reintegrate into our communities? Did you know that 1 in every 3 people know someone very close who could be a friend or a family member who fits into this category? Well, tonight's discussion concludes our Where You At Week, which is a week devoted to self-examination and self-empowerment. What is Where You At? I'm glad you asked. Where you at? Where you at, sis? Where you at, fam? Are you ready? Are you engaged? Do you know who's on the ballot? Do you know what issues affect you? Are you ready for the general election? So tonight, to conclude this week, we have assembled a dynamic panel to once again create critical conversations concerning current controversies that are designed to inform and empower our ex-offender community on how to reclaim, rebound, and reintegrate. But more importantly, we want to reach some of these 30,000 people to become a member or a part of the voting process. So before we begin this hour of power, we will hear some welcoming remarks and some introductions by my social action co-chair, Sarah Crystal Watts.
Hi, I'd like to welcome everyone to Houston Metropolitan Alumnae live Facebook of Where You At, bringing information to you that's critical at this time in our community. We will have as our Carolyn Williams is our moderator. We have Aaron Equator. We have Tina Kingshill, Bernard Freeman, better known as Bun B. And we also have one other person, but his name slipped. I'm sorry.
Melvin Halsey.
Melvin Halsey, yes, as our guest for tonight. Sit back and enjoy and find some very interesting information that will be useful for you and those that you care about.
Thank you, Sarah Watts. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Our first panelist is Ms. Tina Kingshill. Ms. Tina is the Coordinating Director of Houston Justice. Welcome, Ms. Kingshill, and thank you for participating tonight.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank Andrea Talbert for inviting me, and the Social Action Committee of HMAC for inviting me to take part in this discussion tonight. I think it's an important discussion to have. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I am the Coordinating Director at Houston Justice. I joined the organization in 2018, 2 years into retirement from a 26-year career in the gas pipeline industry. Prior to Houston Justice, I'd been volunteering my time 2 days a week with the Houston ACLU office and had taken the class to become a volunteer deputy voter registrar, that's a mouthful, otherwise known as a VDVR, which certified me to register voters in Harris County. Houston Justice was just about to launch their first Project Orange voter registration outreach at Harris County Jail, and that's where I got involved. Houston Justice is a nonpartisan advocacy group founded in 2014 with the ambitious goal of changing our grand jury system, making it more reflective of Harris County's diversity. This grassroots effort, spearheaded by founder Darrell Douglas, resulted in passage of a state law in 2015, making grand jury selection random in counties as diverse as Harris. With completion of that successful initiative, Houston Justice today is a very active, nonprofit 501c3 organization whose advocacy includes voting rights, criminal justice reform, recidivism, eradicating homelessness, and injustice in marginalized and underserved communities at large. Our website is at www.houstonjustice.org. So what is Project Orange? Project Orange is the brainchild of Houston Justice founder Darrell Douglas, who had worked as a sergeant in the prison system. Darrell's idea was to have volunteer deputy voter registrars, or VDVRs, go into the jails, working floor to floor and pod to pod, registering eligible detainees to vote. Many people don't realize that eligible incarcerated citizens have a constitutional right to vote. In 1974, the U.S. Supreme Court in O'Brien versus Skinner affirmed that right. Jails may not intentionally, with gross negligence or with reckless or callous indifference, deprive voters of their constitutional right to vote, per citation 42 U.S.C. 1983. It is the jail's duty to permit people held pre-trial or on a misdemeanor to vote.
So Ms.
Jails-
Kingshill, can I have you to pause right there? I
Yes, ma'am.
just want to make sure our listening audience understands. Can you repeat just what you said about the right to vote as a detainee?
Yes. Eligible incarcerated citizens have a constitutional right to vote. Per the Supreme Court in O'Brien versus Skinner, that right was affirmed. Jails may not intentionally, with gross negligence, or with reckless or callous indifference, deprive voters of their constitutional right to vote.
Awesome.
And
awesome.
by eligible incarcerated folks, let me just briefly say who that is.
Right.
Basically, you must be 18 years old. You must be a U.S. citizen.
Correct.
And if you're a convicted felon, you must be off paper. In other words, your sentence has been totally served. You're not on probation, parole, anything like that. So if you meet those three criteria, you are eligible to register to vote.
Okay,
A
so
lot of people.
so with Project Orange, if I, heaven forbid, am being detained because I cannot make a bond, if I passed a hot check and I'm just sitting in jail, I've never been convicted before, you're telling me that the Constitution affords me the right to vote, even though I've met all the criteria, but I'm not yet a convicted felon. Is this what Project Orange deals with?
That is correct.
Awesome.
In fact, let me give you a quick rundown. This is in plain language. You can vote if you're charged with a misdemeanor. Can you vote? Yes. If you're on deferred adjudication for a misdemeanor, you can vote. If you're convicted of a misdemeanor, you can vote. If you're charged with a felony, you can vote. If you're on deferred adjudication for a felony, you can vote.
Correct.
If you're convicted of a felony, you can't vote. unless you've completed your felony punishment, including any term of incarceration, parole, supervision, or period of probation, or
Right.
you've been pardoned. Okay.
Okay, so
At that point, you can vote.
okay, so if you'll just tell us a little bit more about Project Orange,
Okay.
why is it important, and how did you come to secure this partnership with the sheriff? This is Harris County is the debatable third or second largest county in America. I think we have one of the largest jail systems. What had to happen for you all to collaborate with the current sheriff to make this happen? How did that happen?
Well, I don't know if you know Darrell, but Darrell has a way of working his magic. He actually contacted Sheriff Gonzalez and arranged a meeting
Okay.
and to discuss the possibility of allowing Houston Justice to spearhead the effort in coordination with the Harris County Tax Assessor Voter Registrar's Office, of course.
Okay.
So a meeting was held in December of 2017, and Sheriff Gonzalez agreed to move forward with the project. He was very receptive. So working with Assistant Chief Schmidt and an assembly of escorting officers, Project Orange was launched at Harris County Jail. That's the largest county jail in Texas, by the way, on
Awesome.
Sunday, January 14th, 2018. That was our pilot program started. So over the course of 4 consecutive Sundays, myself and other VDRs gathered at the jail for a 4-hour shift, registering inmates in the morning and another 3 hours registering visitors in the afternoon.
Awesome.
We knew we were onto something when we saw the enthusiasm among the detainees who were eager to register and request ballots by mail. We repeated that effort again over 4 consecutive Sundays in September. Okay, so we had 2 rounds. We normally go in the first quarter, which would be before a primary, and then the third quarter, which would be before a general election.
Right.
So averaging about 15 volunteers per shift and 9 escorting officers from the jail, our grand total for 2018 was 1,400 inmates registered with 304 ballot by mail requests, which was about a 22%.
Awesome.
We've not bad for a pilot program for the
Awesome.
first time that we've gone in. Over the past 3 years, Houston Justice has registered a grand total of 2,700 voters and facilitated 1,279 ballot by mail requests. They overwhelmingly, if they know they're going to be incarcerated on that election day, they overwhelmingly request a ballot come to the jail. These folks want to vote.
That's awesome.
That's like
awesome.
47%. Included in that total, and in spite of COVID-19, this has been a big hindrance for us in the third quarter of this year.
Right.
We were able to go back into the jail in August and September, and with the appropriate PPE in place, we managed to register another 245 detainees with 583 requests for ballots by mail. Now, some of those inmates were already registered to vote, so we didn't have to register them, but we did facilitate their ballot by mail application.
Okay.
And I want to shout out to Bun B because I don't know if y'all are aware that he did a public service announcement that we ran on closed circuit TV at the Harris County Jail. And I want to say thank you very much. They did a great job. And that was something that was put on the TVs prior to our coming in. So that
Right.
the detainees were coming.
Right, and we do intend to talk to Bun B about his work, specifically with that project that he helped you with. Just one last question. How do you go about securing your VDVRs? That's a tricky word to say, volunteer deputy voter registrars. Where do you pull your resources from? How do you find people that are fortuitous enough to go into the jail and talk with these people and help them to participate in democracy?
We usually run events out on Facebook. I start about 6 weeks ahead of time, and I run an event out there with a sign-up form, and we usually get quite a few people responding. This year was kind of tough because people were afraid to go in with the COVID virus. But yeah, I've had up to 60 people respond. Now,
Wow.
They don't all work all four weeks, but it averages about 15 volunteers per shift. And with our guard escorts, we're able to pan out. And, you know, Harris County Jail has 3 locations. A lot of people don't even
Right.
know that.
Right.
It's a lot of ground to cover, anywhere from 8 to 10,000 inmates at any given time. So
Right.
the more bodies we have, the quicker we can do it and the more ground we can cover.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing the work of the organization, which is very important, very informative. Thank you for enlightening us on what you are doing. Can you please share the website once again, just in case our listening audience would like more information on Houston Justice, or if they'd like to volunteer or become involved?
Absolutely. We're at www.houstonjustice.org.
Okay, and we that information, as well as other voting information, will be shared in our comment section. So if you're listening, if you want to get involved, go to the website and find out what's going on. Before we go to our next panelist, I just want to remind everyone that the last day to register to vote in Texas is October the 5th, 2020. Your application needs to be received, not postmarked, not in the mail. It should be received on or before October the 5th. So if you're not registered, go ahead and get registered. Parents, if you have a child that's 17 years and at least 10 months, they can register to vote. They must be 18 to vote, but they can register at 17 years and 10 months. So we're going to move ahead in our discussion. Our next panelist really needs no introduction, but we are pleased to have the award-winning rapper/activist Bun B to join us in this discussion. Bun B, welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm glad to have you here again. One day you here, and the next day you gone. I'm sorry, I had to put that in there. Tell us how and why did you get involved in this type of activism and fighting for change? You had a successful musical career, entertainment. What was it that prompted you to start raising your voice in another way?
Well, I think for people in my position, right, we, at some point, we recognize the level of influence that we have with people. And it's very easy to influence people to buy your music, buy your merchandise, come to concerts and stuff like that. But there comes a point in time when you have to realize that maybe your influence with people is meant for larger purposes and not necessarily for things that are often just, purely self-advantageous. My wife is a very concerned citizen of the city. There are a lot of things that she sees happening on a local level, a state level, and a federal level. And, she's very adamant about fighting for change, not only for our children, but for our grandchildren. And she doesn't hesitate to inform me of moments that are necessary to activate my platform. And, the older we get, the more we learn about how things really work in this world. And we realize that even though we may be aware of a lot of things and the necessity to stand up and fight for change, make sure you're registered, make sure you vote, make sure you're active in your community, other people may not have that level of awareness. So it's important for me to use my platform and my voice to just educate people on things that they probably need to know and aren't even aware of happening in this country. A lot of my base are either current or former felons. And a lot of them operate under the notion that once you get a felony in America, you can't vote, which is not true. Many states do offer felons who are no longer doing any time, whether it be currently incarcerated in a prison or on parole or whatever, that they can vote, that their rights have been reinstated once they've completed their time with the state. And so I want, all of these people who need this information and need this knowledge to get it if possible. When we look at, specifically on like a local and a state level, some of these elections are won by, less than 1,000 votes.
Right, very slim margins.
And as Ms. Kingshill, thank you for your shout out earlier, will tell you is that, they were able to register more than enough people just locally in Harris County to shift some of these margins, right? And so I feel it's imperative that a person with my level of influence and my voice lend it to worthy causes. And right now, I can't think of a more worthwhile cause than voting in this year's election. You know, in our community, the conversation of voting usually only comes up 4 years. And while it is important to be involved in national elections, I always felt that local and state elections are the ones that concern people on a daily basis when it comes to
Right.
the neighborhood you live in, the conditions of that neighborhood, the condition of the streets you drive down.
Correct.
All of these are local issues,
Correct.
but we don't really have conversations about local elections. We typically only have these broad conversations every 4 years when there's a presidential election. And I think we do a disservice to ourselves by not engaging in every level of elections, of public offices.
Right.
And so that's a big part of why I'm active, and it's the right thing to do, you know? It's simply the right thing to do.
Right.
Even if I wasn't an entertainer or person of influence, whatever you call it, I do care about the city I live in. I care about the people that live in the city with me.
Right.
And I want us all to have the best advantages and the best opportunities in life, to prosper, to grow, for employment, for education, for the ability to live where we want to live and prosper in life in general. And voting is a big part of that, right? Having
Right.
people that represent you in the way that you would want to be represented, having people from your district or your city or whatever it may be who understand what's happening directly to you in your community and have the same general concerns about that community that you do.
Right.
And a lot of times, you know, people I would say the people that I have influence with are either confused or simply jaded about the process in
Correct.
particular, and they don't take their cues from ABC 13. They don't take their cues from CNN or MSNBC, right? A lot of them, especially in current times, they take their views from people who maybe don't know any more than they do,
Correct.
right? And so,
Right.
and I've built up a certain level of trust with the people of this community to where they know that if I point them in a certain direction, there's a good reason for it. I
Right.
can express that reason, articulate it to them, whether it be in the King's English or in layman's terms. And I think that's
Correct.
important. I think that's important that people have someone that could speak to them, and you know, whatever the environment, whatever the situation may be, someone that they can speak to them that they trust. Because a lot of people don't really trust the process.
That is true. That is correct.
And I think a big part of that is the fact that locally, and that's why I think it always starts locally, because they see people that represent their district, people that represent their county, people who represent their city, but they don't see the changes that they would like to see in their community. And I'm like, well, if you get involved and you get engaged and you find out who knows about what streets are messed up in Third Ward, right? And which parks need to be revitalized in Fifth Ward, and all these different things that's
Correct.
happening in your community or your hood, however you want it to be phrased to you, then
Right.
you need to be informed. You need to look at the candidates. You need to listen to them and see exactly what intentions they have for your community and if they speak to your concerns.
Well, one of my
And
favorite, I'm sorry, one of my favorite sayings is democracy is not a spectator sport.
No, you
Right.
have to get involved.
You have to get in the game. So thank you for lending your voice, for lifting your voice, just to all of those issues that you speak of. So Ms. Tina talked about you working with Project Orange, and I know the answer to this, but I wanted you to tell us exactly what you did in the form of I believe it was a PSA that was run in the jail along with Trader Truth, where
Yes.
you encouraged, if you'll tell the listening audience what it is that you did to garner support for Project Orange for the detainees in the county jail.
Right. So Trader Truth and I were at Breakfast Club with Marcus Davis and several other local people in the city who have the same concerns that we do, and are fighting to get that engagement, right? To get people out here engaged, to get them registered and get them ready to vote. And during that meeting, I became aware of Project Orange, which I had never heard of before. I was not aware that if you were currently in jail, pre-trial, that you could vote. And I had heard that in Texas that felons could vote, but sometimes even if they say that, you'll hear people say like, well, yeah, but it's 7 years after, or it has to be a certain amount of time um, after you're out of prison or off paper before you can actually vote. And so they dispelled a lot of notions that I had involved with it. And I was like, well, people need to know about this. I'm like, people in the county
Absolutely.
need to know about this. People on the street need to know about it. And so they were like, well, we would love for you to be a part of getting that word out. So Trey and I both recorded PSAs, as Ms. Kingshill said, that were actually played in the county jails.
Right.
Right. So it wasn't just something that was available for people online and people on the street, but it was something that those who were currently incarcerated in Harris County could actually see. And we explained to them the process of how they get themselves involved and how do they gain the ability to vote while in Harris County jail. And
Right.
I'm so glad that it worked. I never thought it was going to be, it's something that people didn't embrace. I feel like if Bun B and Trade the Truth are talking to you about something, that you would at least give it a consideration. You're not necessarily going to write it off, right? Like if we took the time to give you this game and we haven't steered you wrong previously, then, there's no need to steer you wrong now. And there's no need for
Correct.
you to not embrace the knowledge that we're trying to give you. And so I was happy to be a part of the initiative. I'm very proud of that effort. I mean, it's one of several efforts that I'm a part of in the city of Houston in terms of just getting that message out to people from a voice that they recognize, a voice that they trust, and a voice that they're familiar with. I think I can't speak to that enough, how important it is that for some people who don't have a frame of reference and who don't have a point of entry, the person trying to inform them is key. The person
Correct.
that's telling them to take that lead is very key. And it's important for people like me who already have that relationship with those people to make sure I'm pointing them in the right direction.
Well, we certainly appreciate that. I believe our first conversation that you and I had, I explained to you, I said, people will listen to Bun B before they listen to Delta Sigma Theta. And we just, again, appreciate your voice. We appreciate your activism. Just one final question. We know that you've been on the forefront all summer long. I don't want to repeat what's been going on, but you played an integral part with the march after George Floyd's untimely death. You've been on panel discussions for police reform. With that being said, are there any other things that you have in the works or that you'd like to share with the community that will listen to you?
Well, I'm currently working with Chris Hollins. He's the county clerk, and he's over voting in the city of Houston. So he and I just recorded a set of PSAs to inform people about polling sites, the availability of those sites, time frames, really encouraging early voting, right, to get people out there as soon as possible. And there's also going to be one day in October where some polling places are going to be open for 24 hours.
Correct.
Right. So for those, because that's a big concern for some people is that, I won't have a chance to vote because I work very late hours and I won't get off from work until after the polls have already closed. And so so every different concern that people may have in the quest to get their vote registered and to get registered to vote and have their voices heard in the voting process, we try to eliminate any obstacles that people may have. There's going to be walk-up locations. There's also going to be drive-through in Harris County. They're actually going to have drive-through locations so that people can they don't even have to get out of the car. They can vote from their car. We're going to have a lot of different opportunities for people to be a part of the process. And so I was very happy to work with Mr. Hollins and getting that word out as well, because we don't want to miss anybody, right? We want everybody that has the ability to vote to be aware of how they can vote and where they can vote and what the process is. And we know that right now during COVID, it's difficult for some people. Some people more than others are more susceptible to the virus. So not only do we want them to be involved, we want to also show that Harris County is providing safe opportunities to go out and vote. So for most people, you will not have the excuses or the reasons that you may have had previously in order to not be involved and a part of the process. And I was very proud to be a part of that.
Awesome. Well,
I want to shout out. I want to shout out to Chris Hollins too. He's been they've been very active with us. In fact, when we do the ballot by mail applications, we normally have to sign them, each individual one, because when you mail it for someone else, you have to sign off on it. Well, we set up a system to where I'm actually handing them off in batches directly to Holland's assistant. So that's been invaluable to us.
Right. Well,
Amazing.
again, Bun B, we thank you. We look forward to this this PSA that's forthcoming, and we thank you again for lending your voice. And back to your wife, that's what happens when you marry a woman from Jackie Yates Senior High School. That's how we do it. We're very concerned. We're very committed. We come from the heart of the city, and we have very big hearts. Just before we go to our next panelist, I want to let our viewing audience know tomorrow at Bud's House of Meats, Bud's House of Meat Market, located at 6730 Cullen Street. If you would like to register to vote, there will be some VDVRs, volunteer deputy voter registrars, there from 9 to 12 p.m., 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. If you are ex-felon or if you have some questions that maybe you're not certain, there'll be a talented team there to answer your questions and to get you registered to vote. Remember, democracy is not a spectator sport. You got to get in the game to win. Okay, so moving on, our next panelist is Ms. Erin Quander, who is a licensed and practicing attorney in the state of Texas. Ms. Quander, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Great, great, great. So we've heard about Project Orange, and we've heard about how we can best reach ex-offenders or people awaiting sentencing. And we thought we'd hear from you because as a lawyer, you can tell us what thus the state of Texas says. So my first question talks about probation, and Ms. Tina kind of touched on this earlier. Can you tell us what is the difference between probation, or what we used to call straight probation, and deferred probation? Tell us, and so everybody can kind of get a better feel of Ms. Tina's point about if you're on deferred adjudication, you can vote. So let me just be quiet and let you talk.
Okay, so with straight probation, generally the person who's charged with the offense is either found guilty or they are either pleading guilty. And so once they are found guilty, or if they take a plea deal, then they are then placed on community supervision to serve their sentence. And so what that means is that instead of them going to jail, they are usually able to continue to, remain in the community under certain supervision requirements. And then in a straight probation case, you do have a conviction on your record. So, it can never be, with some exceptions, usually it can never be erased from your record. And so you will have the conviction. And once you are done completing your probation, then you'll be let off probation, but you still will have that conviction. With deferred adjudication, that's where a party, they can either plead guilty to an offense, and the courts can defer their finding of guilt, and then they are placed on something that's similar to probation. It's like community supervision as well. And as long as they successfully complete the deferred adjudication, then the case is dismissed and there is no conviction on their record. And then so if you are successful in completing your deferred adjudication, you can later on petition for a non-disclosure where your record will be sealed. So the difference between the two is straight probation, there's the conviction. Deferred adjudication, as long as you successfully complete it, then you will have no conviction on your record. And you can answer no when someone says, have you been convicted of an offense? The answer is no if you successfully complete your deferred adjudication.
Can you repeat that one more time for deferred adjudication?
So for deferred adjudication, if you're asked if you've ever been convicted of an offense, and if you were successful in completing that deferred adjudication, you can answer no, because it's not a conviction.
If it was successfully completed.
Correct.
Probation. Okay, awesome, awesome. So hopefully everybody, I hope you heard that. You've not been convicted, so you're good. The second question, am I eligible to vote if I'm currently serving deferred adjudication on a felony, but I have no other priors? I've never been in any trouble. It's kind of like I told Ms. Tina. I went to jail for forgery. I've been let out. I'm on probation, deferred adjudication. Am I eligible to vote?
So if you are on deferred adjudication, you are still eligible for you are still eligible to vote because again, it's not a conviction. So as long as you have no other, as long as you're not on probation or anything, and if it's just deferred, you can still vote. You're still eligible.
Okay, and no prior convictions. I just messed up one night. I don't know. I lost my mind and I'm on track and I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. And I'm on deferred. I'm still eligible to vote.
Right.
Okay, all righty. We kind of
Prior
talked about,
convictions don't have anything to do with it, do they? The prior convictions wouldn't have
Right.
anything to do with that, right?
That's correct. It's because even if you are prior, oh, I'm sorry, I should have answered that. But yes,
No.
even if you do have prior felonies, that's not going to affect you as long as you're discharged from your probation
From
and
those-
no pending,
Okay.
no pending supervision or any type of requirements. So
Right,
yes,
right,
okay.
priors don't matter.
Okay, and then our next question is, and we've kind of already talked about this, please explain what on paper and off paper means. Again, well, I'll just let you talk.
Okay, so normally when you hear,
On paper and off paper.
okay, so normally when you hear someone say that they are on papers, that means that they are currently under some sort of probation or parole or some community supervision. And so that means that, you know, if they do something to violate, they know that because they are on papers, they can potentially go back to jail and have to serve their sentence in incarceration. So when they're off papers, that means that they're no longer reporting. They are not, they pretty much, their sentence has been discharged. They're not on any probated sentences, no parole.
Okay, awesome. Awesome. Well, for the record, I'm not either. How about that? Okay, also, please tell our listening audience, are there any types of convictions, felony convictions that will permanently disenfranchise me for voting? So if I did some kind of aggravated assault, or if I, ran a car into somebody, are there any types of offenses that will ever keep me from voting here in the state of Texas once I've completed my sentence, once I've completed parole, or once I've fulfilled all of the requirements of the court?
So as long as you fulfilled all your requirements and you're not on any type of, supervision and your sentence has been, discharged, you're eligible. So there's not any cases that will prevent you from being eligible to vote. I'm sorry.
So no one crime is worse than the other?
No, as long as you paid your debt and, completed your parole or your probation, you're good to go.
Okay, y'all heard it from her. Are there any other thoughts you'd like to share?
The one thing that I want to share with people who have been on parole or probation, in Texas, it is the automatic right. Your rights are automatically restored once you are done completing your sentence. But the most important thing for them to remember is that they need to re-register to vote. So if you are previously registered and then you go to jail and you commit an offense and you're on probation, once it's complete, you need to re-register.
Correct. All righty. Well, thank you, Ms. Sora Quanda, for setting us straight and telling us what says the state of Texas, the great state of Texas. And thank you for lending your voice to this discussion.
Thank you.
Before we go to the next panelist, we want to remind you to like, comment, share this live video, start a watch party. We also want you to check the links, the comments. There'll be links to various resources for you to get ready, to get registered, and be ready to vote. Okay, so our next panelist is Mr. Melvin Halsey. Mr. Melvin is a lifelong friend of mine, a Navy vet, and someone who is just as passionate about, who is passionate about this very subject that we are talking about tonight. Mr. Halsey, welcome.
Let me just say thank you all for allowing me to be here. What I would like to say is, Ms. Kingshill, thank you so very much. 2008, I wanted to vote for Barack Obama. I wasn't convicted of anything. I went to the law library to get what we used to call an absentee ballot back then.
Right.
The law librarian told me, you a convicted felon, you can't vote. I was very, very distraught, you see, because see, I knew that I was not convicted and I knew that I could vote. But at the same time, here are all these myths that Bun B and we hear when we locked up, you see, because see, back in the day, it used to be, well, you gotta wait 5 years once you get out parole. You see, that no longer exists. But what I'm saying is, I thank you all for Project Orange, because it is something that needs to be done immediately. And if you need me to volunteer, I'll volunteer. I don't have a problem with it.
We're looking for volunteers all the time. But let me just make one comment to that. I understand exactly what you're saying. And what really took me aback was the fact that most of the officers don't understand that you can vote once you're off paper. They were like, their jaws dropped.
Right.
So even the officers aren't aware of that. And we always tell the detainees once they're, we always tell them, spread the word. Let people know the real truth as to what the law is.
Right. And so that's one of the reasons that we are here tonight, because there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of disinformation. And that's why we assembled this panel to give the correct information to our viewing audience. So Mr. Halsey, I know that you are a part of Texas Advocates for Justice. Can you tell me how it is that you came to be a part of this organization, which is dedicated to helping citizens who are coming back into society following incarceration or probation? How did you become a part of this?
First of all, let me just briefly tell you what Texas Advocates is, okay? Texas Advocates for Justice is a community organizing and base building program of grassroots leaderships that unites individuals and families who are directly impacted by mass incarceration and criminalization in the state of Texas. We believe no true long-lasting change in the way our society deals with incarceration will be altered unless that change effort is led by those whose lives and communities have been directly impacted. We use our personal stories and direct experience with incarceration to build power and lead campaigns to transform the criminal justice system and build safe and healthy communities. I became a member of Texas Advocates for Justice through Bridges to Life when I was incarcerated. And let me say this here, y'all. We are not ex-offenders. We are formerly incarcerated and we are returning citizens, okay? Because the stigma of somebody saying you're ex-con, you're ex-felon, that bothers one. That's a psychological thing. Now we can talk about that, the trauma and all that while being incarcerated. However, I came to Taj through Bridges to Life. And of course, Bridges to Life was founded by John Sage. And what made me be more engaged in what's going on with the criminal justice system is because of how we are treated, the stuff that we go through, and we need to have a voice. So I came to the Taj in 2015 after I got off parole. So I want to continue to do exactly what needs to be done in this criminal justice system here in the state of Texas.
Question, Mr. Melvin. You talk about the way you were treated. Can you give us a little light on what happens when you are released from parole or from Texas Department of Corrections? What are the steps that help you to reintegrate specifically with voting? Are you advised of your rights? Are you encouraged? Are you just released and see you later? How does that work?
I'm so glad you asked that question, Carol. When you're released from the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, you may get medicine, you may get a little money, but let me say this, you were supposed to go to a lane that's called reentry, and you were supposed to get an ID, a state ID from DPS, not that, well, I can't say that, not that little card that you get from TDC. See, you were supposed to get an ID, your social security card, whatever medicine that you have, and your money.
Okay.
Don't nobody tell you you can vote when you get off parole. Don't nobody tell you that. You got people to discharge and be like, man, I didn't know I could vote, you see. So with Bun B doing what they're doing, with Ms. Kingshill doing what she's doing in the county, this eliminates a lot of things that we think about when we incarcerated. Because not only do we got to think about, you know, our family, how we feel, you know, this is something that's so very, very important to get the opportunity to vote. Because I come from a family where when we voted at Hartsfield, all of our names were on there. And my mama would go and check and say, why you ain't voting, you see?
Right.
So it was so, I cried when I voted for Mayor Turner. I did, because it had been such a long, long time for me to vote again. And it was like, man, I gotta do this. So
Exactly.
it was a great, great feeling for me to vote. But
Right.
I
Well,
don't get that from TV.
Right.
It's an emotional experience for, I got to tell you, the volunteers and the detainees at the jail, because the detainees are, they're emotional about it because it makes them feel connected again. It's
Right.
just one part of feeling connected back into society. And
Right.
the people that are registering them to vote are seeing a side of lives that, you know, any one of us can make a mistake and be there, right, be in their shoes. So we all learn from the experience, and I think that's one of the most valuable things about this project.
Right. Well, Mr. Halsey, thank you for your candor, and thank you for sharing your experience with us. We just we're learning a lot tonight. I'm a little full, but the time is almost well spent. Well, it's been well spent, but we're almost done. We have one final panelist, which is Dr. Marlon Smith. Dr. Marlon Smith, are you with us tonight?
Yes, I am. So thank you for
Okay.
and forgive me for being late on here. I had something come up right before, and I said it would happen to me, but I appreciate you all inviting me back.
No worries, no worries. Dr. Marlon Smith, I don't have all night to tell you who he is, but he's many things. He participated in our first town hall meeting this week, the Where You At meeting, and the girls called me up. They said, can you have him to come back Friday? I'm like, I'll try to do it. I'll ask him to bring his truth again. So thank you for joining us at such short notice. But I know that your background is in reentry and a lot of criminal justice. And again, that's why we felt it prudent to bring you back on. But very quickly, can you tell us about your work with your previous employer or previous nonprofit, which was, I believe, Interchange Freedom Initiative? Can you tell us what you did? And I know we want to talk about recidivism and reducing those rates. For our viewing audience, please tell us your work with this important piece.
So let me be clear. Interchange Freedom Initiative is not mine. I work for the Interchange Freedom Initiative as their as the Texas State Reentry Manager. The Interchange Freedom Initiative is an initiative. In fact, it is one of the oldest pre-release reentry programs in our country. It was actually started by then George Bush when he was governor of Texas, and he did so in conversation and partnership with Prison Fellowship Ministries, which was started by Chuck Colson. And the Interchange Freedom Initiative really is a pre-release reentry program. And in fact, it is a 365-bed unit at the Carol Vance unit, which is a Jester 2 unit in Sugar Land. And so what I did at Interchange was I oversaw the reentry division, which is to say, once men get into the prison program, they can come from wherever in the state of Texas, as long as they have certain qualifications. One of those qualifications is that they had to be re-entering either into the Dallas-Fort Worth metropolitan area, or into the Austin, San Antonio area. So if they were going to other places, they wouldn't be able to, but you could apply to that program in any prison that you're in, because I think you all have been talking about jails, and I'm in the prison, which is a very different system. But that work is to work with men and their families, because what we recognize in reentry is that whenever you have an individual, we were an all male unit, but whenever you have men who are incarcerated or women who are incarcerated, their families are incarcerated with, so that we understand that real proper reentry requires that you have to have a full holistic reentry approach that really takes into account the whole entire family, which then has to take into account the communities in which they go back to. And so our work was literally that. It was to figure out how do we reduce the recidivism rate of men going back to prison. And so we proudly boasted a 13% recidivism rate at IFI when the national average is over 60%.
Wow.
Awesome, awesome.
Incredible.
Yes, okay, and so I have a question. Does voter suppression lead to or contribute to recidivism in your opinion? Or are there any statistics that show that?
Well, so that's an interesting question, right? So what voter suppression is about, it is about how do we limit the civic engagement of certain citizenry in order to maintain a certain power or status quo. Like that is what voter suppression is.
Correct.
So a tool of voter suppression then is the prison. And we're in Texas, right? So it behooves us to understand that Texas has one of the oldest prison systems in our country. And in fact, Texas is the only state that in the Confederate states that did not go bankrupt in the Civil War. And the reason why is because Texas utilized their prisons or transformed their prisons as an income base for the Confederate states, having men, particularly Black men who were in that prison, creating textiles for the Confederate Army, sewing material, tents and clothing and others. And so that actually when Texas the Civil War was over, they continued to have their prisons as their means. So we just talked about recently, we found these bones in Sugar Land, right?
Sugar Land
That
95.
so that is the work of unknown Black men who were then transitioned into labor quadrants in Sugar Land, Texas, because most of us don't know, for those of us who have Imperial Sugar, that's who was making that sugar for you, for men in the prison system at that time.
Correct.
In Sugar Land. So yeah, so to answer your question more succinctly, the prison is a voter suppression tactic. That is what it is. The criminal justice system is a voter suppression tactic.
Okay, awesome, awesome. And Ms. Tina touched on this a while ago about constitutional rights. So if detainees have the right to be fed, sheltered, and receive medical care, are their constitutional rights in jeopardy or being violated if they're not allowed to register and to vote?
So that's a great question, right? I'm not a lawyer, so my scholarship is around the idea of the prison, right? So part of what the prison is actually constructed to do is to create a new form of slavery. So the best way to look at then what we mean by constitutional rights is that slaves didn't have constitutional rights because slaves were not counted as persons. Slaves were counted as property, right? So the prison recreates that structure, right? So we can ask, are they violating constitutional rights? Yes, but the prison is saying, the structure of the prison is saying, you can't violate a constitutional right to somebody who is not considered a citizen. And the way in which you hold a person outside of a constitutionality is to then not allow them to vote, right? Because if you can't vote, then you are not a part of the citizenry. So part of what we use to accept, which is why I think there is a lack of real structural changes in the prison, is that the prison is a labor market. So you can't vote, but guess what? Prisoners are counted in census. Why are they counted in the census? Why?
Correct.
Because that is a money-making tool. So the more people that you have, for instance, in these small towns, why do we have a lot of prisons in small towns? It is so that small towns can have a revenue source and a revenue generator, because they start getting state and federal funds based on that census report, because they have a huge prison. And then what happens within those small towns, right? Then that means those towns work in that prison because it becomes, or they receive funds and money from that prison. And so again, it's a more complicated answer, but in the practice of the prison, you're not violating constitutional rights because, according to the prison, we are not engaged in citizenry. Now they can have, they can have all of these different policies within the prison, but here's my argument about like policies we have. Like just recently, we started realizing that people, including men, are being raped in prison in disproportionate numbers, right? Than we were understanding. But the fact that you have to have a policy about rape when rape is already considered a state and federal sanctioned against state and federal law means that the bodies within inside that wall who have been convicted are now not considered a part of the legal system under which you and I and those of us in the free world get to operate.
Well, as a two-time graduate of Sam Houston State, I'm intimately familiar with small towns and prisons. And just to touch on one other thing, we are still in the midst of Census 2020. I want to encourage everyone to be counted. As Dr. Smith just stated, there's a thing called prison gerrymandering, but we don't have time to talk about that tonight.
That's right.
But basically, inmates that are serving time in Texas prisons are counted where they are in prison at that time. The money, as he said, goes to that county, that city. But if John Doe is released in the next 2 or 3 years, the money is in the city or county where he was incarcerated, not back in his community where he needs it. So hopefully there'll be some legislation coming forward to change or to do away with prison gerrymandering. It is very important that a person, to me, that is in custody be counted in the community that they live in so that funds, roads, bridges, or whatever will be there when they get out. We are short on time. We want to give everybody a couple of closing remarks. Ms. Kingsville, very quickly, can you give us some closing remarks in this hour of power? Ms. Tina?
Ms. Tina, you're on mute.
I'm sorry. We worked with Campaign Legal Center, and on this last topic that we were talking about, on constitutional rights, the 14th Amendment of the Constitution is being violated when these people that are incarcerated are denied the right to vote or register to vote, for the exception of four requirements. I won't go into the details on that. Maybe we can put it out there somewhere. But there is the 14th Amendment that is being, in other words, county jails have the responsibility to provide the service.
Right.
Outside of 4 exceptions.
Okay, and just to be clear, Ms. Tina's work is post-conviction and Dr. Smith's work is, Ms. Tina's work is pre-conviction and Dr. Marlon Smith's work is post-conviction. So I believe there's a little rule difference between a county jail and a state. Again, thank you, Ms. Tina, for joining us tonight. Bun B, do you have any closing remarks?
Well, first, I thank you for the opportunity to speak on this panel. I think this is very commendable what you guys are doing in terms of getting the word out on all levels. But I think it's the people who are incarcerated are the ones that are least likely to get this information. So I commend organizations like Project Orange for stepping up and letting people be aware of their rights. Because I mean, it's suppression, right? The fact that a lot of these people have no idea what look, there's so many things in this world that you have the right to, that unless you ask about these things and demand these things, no one's going to tell you.
Correct.
Right? Though we tend to write off people who are imprisoned, right? We don't group them with us anymore, and we don't share with them their rights as citizens. We've seen thousands of cases where prisoners have had to fight for the rights that the Constitution bestows upon every person in this country. But once it seems that you commit a crime, that you're no longer even counted, as they just spoke to with the census. You're not even counted as a citizen in this country anymore. And so these are one of the rights that we want our brothers who are currently incarcerated for pretrial, or those who have done their time, fulfilled their obligations to the state, that come home, to know that they are still not only a citizen in this country, but that they have, at least in the state of Texas is concerned, that they do have the rights as everyone else in this country, and they should exercise those rights, most importantly of which is to vote. Because if they think about the judge that prosecuted them, right? Many people of color have been prosecuted disproportionately, unfairly, sentenced disproportionately and unfairly. Well, a lot of that goes down to these judges that you sit in front of, and the district attorney that chooses to put your case in front of a grand jury and have you prosecuted. So we have people in our communities that we feel are treating people of color vastly different than everyone else. And we want the same fair judicial process that everyone else is afforded. That's why you need to vote. If no other reason, that's why you need to vote.
Absolutely.
Very well said.
Again, thank you, Bun B. Ms. Quander, any closing remarks?
Yes. Okay. So there was one thing that I wanted to make sure that I said before I get off the call. So we did talk about the people who are actually the voting rights of people who are being detained and the ones who have completed their sentence. But the one thing we didn't talk about is the ones who are indicted and on bond right now, or if they are appealing their sentence. So if you are appealing your case, it's not recognized as something that will keep you from being eligible to vote. So if you're on bond, if you're indicted, just have a pending case, you're eligible to vote. And so the last thing that I want to say is that I appreciate, Ms. Kingshill and, Bun B and the rest of the panelists that are on here, because our brothers and sisters need to hear about their voting rights, because, just like it was said previously, a lot of them just don't trust the process, and they feel like their vote doesn't matter. And it matters because if it didn't matter, there wouldn't be so many efforts. There wouldn't be so many efforts to try to stop you. So that's the big thing too about our local elections. The same judges that you complain about, those are the ones that they're going to hear your case if you ever are before them, and they're the ones that are sentencing your brothers and your family members. So if you don't like what's going on in your county, this is the time to exercise your vote, not just only in the presidential election. So I just want to encourage everybody that's watching to make sure you vote, take advantage of it. And Mr. Halsey, he said a good point too, that he's not an ex-offender. He's someone that's trying to someone who's reintegrated back into society, and we want to make sure that they know that they have rights. And thank you, HMAC, for having me.
Awesome. Thank you for participating. And as just to reiterate what Bun B and Ms. Quander said, all politics are local. Don't stop at the top. You got to go all the way down the ballot. The people closest to you make the decisions that affect you more. Mr. Halsey, are any closing remarks from you?
All I want to say is that no matter who you are, where you are, what you've done, please vote, because it's too important. If the state of Texas can wake you up at 4 o'clock or in the morning to go do a job that you're not getting paid for, you can get your butt up and go vote. You see, take all that stuff that they did to you and turn it into a positive and do something, because we do have a voice. And I know that I've gone through not being able to get an apartment, not being able to get employed. I understand that. But still, as a person who's formerly incarcerated, please, y'all, do not give up. Educate yourself, because if you don't ask no question, you may not get the answer. Don't assume what somebody tells you. Educate yourself and do the research. That's all I got. And may God bless all y'all, because I love all y'all. And Ms. Kingshill, I will definitely volunteer if you need me. I'm at 5207 Cosby Street.
And I'm gonna call you too.
All righty.
You're gonna be sorry you said that.
Okay, so what Melvin is saying is, when Melvin and I were at Cullen Junior High, because it was junior high then, we had to go through the card catalog to find things. Now, information is free. Just make sure that you've got the right information. Dr.
Right.
Smith, any closing remarks from you, sir?
Well, as I said, first of all, once again, thank you all for having this conversation. I do want to reiterate something that Bun B said, because I think it is important for us. Remember, this is Delta Sigma Theta, and I, even as a Kappa man, know that most of the people that we're talking about are not going to be watching this video. So really, we want to implore for us, as we're talking about educating, is that this is a communal responsibility. We're Black people, and this idea of individualism is not a Black ethic that we need to put back where it came from, back in the master's house, and let him have that. We are a communal people, and we hold to a communal value system. And what we have to remember is, if we're not voting, then we are not only allowing of the roughly 2.1 million people who are currently incarcerated behind prisons and jails, roughly 50%, literally half, are Black people. Of that number, roughly 90% of them are Black. But even what's more important is that means that 2.7 million children, roughly, parent who is incarcerated. And of that, 1 out of 9 African-American children, so we can give a context, 1 out of 28 Hispanic children and 1 out of 57 white children have a parent incarcerated, but 1 out of 9 African-American children have a parent incarcerated. So that means when we're not voting, we're not only allowing for those men and women that we know, who we're related to, who we know across the street, who have disappeared. We know they done disappeared for about the last 7 months. We don't know where they went to. That is not only leaving them in prison, but it is tracking their in the prison, because we refuse to understand the role that prison plays as a family workshop. So that I hope that we recognize that when we're voting, really what we're doing is we're saying that we're not going to allow a system that is racist in nature and intentional in its work to capture our children into places of penal captivity. And that means both the juvenile justice system and the adult jail and prisons. And so when we don't vote, we leave them structured to that. And so I hope, as Deltas, as Kappas, and all the Divine Nine, as and Kamala up there running for vice president, and I'm happy for, that we got to remember that the people on the ground need us to do the work, not because we can put Kamala in, not so that we can put Kamala just in the office of vice president, but so we can keep Pookie out of the prison where people are looking for him.
Amen.
Well, I think that's the benediction. Can we pass the plate? So again, just some quick reminders. Deadline to register to vote is October the 5th, 2020. If you're 17 years and 10 months old, you are eligible to register to vote. Anyone needing to register to vote and you don't know how, you can come to Bud's Meat Market tomorrow between 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. There will be people on site to help get you registered. One closing thought from me: polls don't vote, people do. I want you to keep the blinders on. Polls don't vote. Polls are like a thermometer. You stick a thermometer in one person's mouth and it tells you the temperature. That's what a poll is. So polls don't vote, people do. We want to thank you for joining the Houston Metropolitan Alumnae Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta tonight in this most powerful and engaging conversation, where you're at reintegrating, rebounding, and reclaiming. And lastly, please, 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 as the speakers have said, consider sharing this message. Reach the people that we can't reach. Think about your neighbors, your friends, whomever. It'll be here on our page for you to come back and view, you know. So whatever you do, make sure that you share the message. And again, thank you for joining us. Good night.